Welcome back to another explainer. Let's just jump right in today, because we are looking at a truly unique text. We're going to dive deep into an incredibly moving and thorough theological document, written by Aga Bilal. What we have here is a detailed response to a popular theological challenge known as the Islamic Dilemma. But what makes it special is that it's written from a deeply personal, entirely non-combative perspective. So we're going to impartially and thoroughly break down this highly complex religious and historical analysis.
Now, before we get into the heavy theology, we really need to understand where the author is coming from. This whole document is shaped by Bilal's intense human condition. He explicitly talks about his life with autism, which he says drives his need to fully understand the structural logic of faith. But he also shares his severe physical reality, living with lungs that are literally turning to bone. Because of this, he entirely refuses to engage in any sort of ego-driven debate. His ultimate goal isn't to win an argument. As he puts it, what he would truly love is to simply go together and invite someone who is hungry to share a warm meal. He views his work merely as an offering of truth stated with love.
We're going to thoroughly break down Bilal's scriptural scratch paper through 6 key sections: a response rooted in peace, unpacking the Islamic dilemma, the nature of one God, recontextualizing titles and words, the messianic crucifixion paradox, and finally, the universal core message.
All right, starting with section 1, a response rooted in peace, the scratch paper metaphor.
You see, the source emphasizes that Bilal had a near-death experience in an ICU during the first wave of the pandemic, and it completely shifted his focus. In that terrifying moment, he actually felt an absolute, painless peace. Because of that profound encounter, his whole approach to theology is now oriented entirely toward peace and strict, thorough scriptural analysis, rather than trying to defeat an opponent. He calls this document his scratch paper because, kind of like a student showing their math work, he just wants to show the honest, rigorous process of exactly how he arrived at his conclusions using only primary scriptures.
Moving right into section 2, unpacking the Islamic dilemma, the premise and the counter.
So the whole crux of this dilemma is how it's constructed. It's basically a 3-step logical trap. It claims the Quran affirms the Bible, that the Bible contradicts Islamic doctrine, and therefore Islam defeats itself. Checkmate, right? Well, Bilal argues this entire premise is actually built on a fundamental misunderstanding of what the Quran is referring to in the first place.
To counter the dilemma, Bilal draws a really sharp distinction. He argues that the Quran never confirmed the compiled documents of later human councils, like the Council of Nicaea, which decided which books made it into the modern Bible centuries later. Instead, he points out that the Quran is confirming the original spoken divine message, the direct revelation given to the prophets themselves.
And this is where the linguistic gap is just brilliant. The original Greek word euangelium and the Arabic word injil both simply translate to good news. Bilal points out that the gospel originally meant an eternal living message of one God and human accountability, a message carried by every single prophet from Abraham to Jesus to Muhammad. It was not originally a reference to a compiled physical book.
Okay, section 3, the nature of one God beyond human categories.
It's absolutely fascinating how Bilal connects Arabic and Hebrew to clarify this concept. Allah isn't some different competing God. It literally translates to the worshipped one, and it shares the exact same linguistic root as the Hebrew El and Elohim used all throughout the Torah. Bilal notes that Arab Christians have literally called God Allah for over 2,000 years. It's the exact same worshipped one of Abraham and Moses. To back this up, he points straight to the Old Testament's unambiguous declarations, like this one from the book of Numbers stating that God is not a man. Bilal argues against any theology that requires God to become human, pointing out that this idea directly contradicts the Torah's extremely clear declarations that God's nature entirely transcends our human biological categories. Now, what's really interesting is his take on the Hebrew word echad, which is found in the famous Jewish prayer, the Shema. Some theologians argue echad implies a compound unity, kind of like a cluster of grapes, which leaves room for a trinity. But Bilal thoroughly refutes this. He notes the word was historically used to draw the sharpest possible line against the polytheistic families of gods in surrounding ancient cultures. The Torah, he points out, never once describes internal persons within God.
Which brings us to section 4, recontextualizing titles and words, etymology and ancient languages.
Bilal really challenges our modern assumptions about the title Son of God. If we look back at the primary texts, this exact phrase was applied incredibly broadly. Israel is called God's firstborn. David is told by God, "Today I become your father." Adam is literally called the Son of God.
The source argues that in the ancient Semitic world, this was simply an expression of extreme closeness, covenant, and alignment with God's will. It was a high title of honor, not a literal biological or Trinitarian claim.
Let's dig into the etymology a bit, because this is wild. Bilal explains that the Semitic roots for father, baba or av, deeply meant gateway or threshold. It signified the door through which a soul passes into existence. But when you translate these ancient poetic gateway concepts into Greek and Latin, the meaning shifted heavily toward biological parenthood. Bilal argues this literalization fundamentally distorted the relationship between the creator and creation, forcing human gendered limitations onto a completely limitless God.
So naturally, this raises a huge question that always comes up regarding the famous I am statement in the Gospel of John. People frequently cite this as a direct, undeniable claim to divinity. So how does Bilal's thorough framework interpret this moment?
Bilal masterfully pairs the Torah and the Qur'an to look at this totally differently. Just look at Jeremiah 1:5, where God says he knew the prophet before the womb. Bilal connects this directly to the Qur'an's covenant of elast. That's a primordial event where every single human soul testified to God before even entering the physical world. Seen in that light, I am isn't a claim to divinity at all. It's a profound declaration of egoless preexistence. It's an awakening to the fact that all souls share an eternal continuity in God's knowledge, which is far older than any human timeline.
Let's move right into Section 5, the Messianic Crucifixion Paradox, examining the historical pattern.
Looking at historical records and the biblical book of Acts, a very strict historical pattern emerges. Every single false Messiah claimant, guys like Theudas, Judas the Galilean, and Simon Bar Kokhba, they were all disqualified by the Jewish religious establishment for one specific reason. They were killed by human power. The ancient standard was crystal clear. God's true anointed simply could not be defeated by worldly forces.
And here's the paradox Bilal points out. If Jesus truly died on the cross, utterly defeated by the Romans and the religious establishment, he actually fails this strict Jewish messianic test. His death would literally be the disproof. Therefore, Bilal argues, the Islamic claim that God intervened, raised Jesus, and preserved him from death doesn't undermine Jesus at all. It actually protects and completely validates his title as the true, undefeated Messiah.
Finally, Section 6, the universal core message, 3 simple rules.
If you strip away all the complex Greek philosophy and the endless decrees of later human councils, Bilal asserts that the core message of faith has never actually been that complicated. Every prophet in history carried just these 3 basic, unalterable rules. Acknowledge one unique ultimate being, treat people with goodness and justice, and realize that you will ultimately be held accountable for your choices. That's it. That's the core.
And this brings us right back to Bilal's deeply personal, beautiful introduction. The true path, he notes, often seems strange in a world obsessed with power and division. Faith, in this view, isn't a weapon used to win arguments or to assert your tribe's dominance over someone else's. It's the absolute, humble surrender of the human ego.
I'm going to leave you with this final thought straight from Bilal's moving plea. After looking through his thorough scratch paper, we really have to ask ourselves, in our own lives, are we fighting just to win a theological debate and be right, or are we actually working together to feed the hungry and care for the vulnerable? Thank you for joining me on this explainer, and as always, keep asking the big questions.